Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. To those of you that have subscribed, thank you so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now. Press the red button so you can get all the notifications as soon as I upload new videos and new content. So I've gotten some questions around the difference between the GMR 2.1 appointee and the GMR 2.7. So there is a difference also depending on the competent person according to the definitions in the OSH Act and the requirements according to your loading and what power you either generate or consume on your site. So I'll take you through, according to the OSH Act, what the different requirements are, the definitions for the different types of competent people, and also when one would be appointed a GMR 2.1 versus a GMR 2.7. So, in case you didn't know, the Occupational Health and Safety Act is the law, especially in factories and in mines. And it does stipulate, number one, the law according to occupational health and safety of employees. It's got different regulations in there and different requirements for employees, for employers, and how each of us, depending on whether you're an employee or an employer, have a responsibility to the law and ensuring that people are safe. Also in the OSH Act are regulations, and in those regulations are sub-regulations. So it details different regulations under general requirements. Under asbestos, there's regulation on construction, regulations on driven machinery, on moving machinery, on escalators. It details some of the requirements for pressure equipment and boilers. Under machinery safety and machine guarding. So it's very extensive, very detailed, especially in the different sub-regulations. So the Occupational Health and Safety Act and its regulation, it's published by LexisNexis. So if you are looking for the latest edition, do look them up and do get it. Before I break down and speak about how the GMR or General Machinery Regulation is broken down and how one of the key highlights of that regulation is the competent person and who should be appointed under what condition. So you've got the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the different regulations. So the regulations are broken up into four major regulations. So you've got your general regulations, you've got your health regulations, you've got your mechanical regulations, then you've got your electrical. So you get your Occupational Health and Safety Act, and with the different regulations, it's broken down into four major subheadings. Under the different major headings of the different regulations, you've got your general regulations, which is broken down into 7 regulations. You have your health regulations, where you also have 7 regulations. Under mechanical, there are 5 regulations, and under electrical, there are 2 electrical regulations. I'll focus in this blog more on the mechanical regulations, which speak to your driven machinery regulations, your general machinery regulations, lifts and escalators. There's a regulation relating to the government certificate of competency, and also the last one, which is your pressure equipment regulation. The one that speaks a lot to appointment of the competent person, that defines the competent person, and also your GMR, is obviously your general machinery regulation, which is your GMR. The appointment of the 2.1 or 7 or whatnot then speaks to the sub-regulation 2, which is within the regulation. Before we get to that, let me start off with how most of the regulations are broken down. So your general machinery regulation will have a section 1, right? And each of the regulations, even with the OSH Act, section 1 speaks to definitions. So in the definitions, it'll highlight some of the key definitions, some of the words or phrases that will be referred to later according to the OSH Act, so that there isn't any ambiguity. So under the GMR or General Machinery Regulation, some of the key definitions, or actually one of the key definitions, is how they define the competent person. So under the GMR, the competent person, according to the regulation, is broken down and defined in 4 different ways. So it's 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D. So a competent person under the machinery regulations, under section A, this is a person who served an apprenticeship with a trade, who's got 5 years experience in an operational type environment, and a minimum of 1 year experience in a maintenance type field. This person is then deemed a competent person under section 1.A. Competent person in relation to machinery under section 1.B is someone who's got their diploma, so this is either a T3 or an N5 as a minimum, and who has more than 2 years working experience in a factory, in an operational environment and maintenance. That person is then deemed or defined as a competent person under this regulation. A competent person in relation to machinery under section 1.C is a graduate engineer who has more than 2 years working experience and has also passed the OSH Act exam. A competent person under section 1.D is a certificated engineer. So this is someone who's got their GCC. In one of my previous videos, I broke down how one can obtain their GCC without a degree. So whether you've got your N6, your S4, your T4, how you can obtain your GCC. So a person that's got their certificate of competency is then deemed a competent person under the definitions 1.D. Or goes further to detail who must be appointed or who must supervise your site and machinery for what conditions. So if you've got power generation, even power that's derived from some of your sources like steam, and it's greater than 1,200 kilowatts but less than 3,000, you must then have a person that is appointed, or your competent person must be B, C, or D. So remember, B is with a diploma, C is a graduate engineer, and D is a certificated engineer. So if you've got power generation that is greater than 1,200 kilowatts and less than 3,000 kilowatts, you cannot have a competent person A, which is someone with an apprenticeship in a trade, with 5 years experience and 1 year in maintenance. That person is not the right person that you can use, or the person that can supervise the machinery on your site. Where your power generation is greater than 3,000 kilowatts, your competent person who must then supervise the machinery must be either C or D. So C is your graduate engineer who's passed the OSH Act and has got a minimum experience of 2 years, or your certificated engineer. If the maximum demand over a continuous 30 minutes is less than 3,000 kVA, then your competent person can be competent person A. But this person must be registered as an installation electrician. And for further details, you can actually refer to Regulation 11, which is your electrical installation regulation. If the power distribution is greater than 3,000 kVA but less than 10,000 kVA, then your competent person can be person B, C, or D. But if your demand is greater than 10,000 kVA, then your competent person must be person C or D. 7 actually specifies and speaks to how your employer can then appoint more than one person. So it can appoint an additional person, GMR 2.7, to assist your GMR 2.1. The OSH Act and even the regulations, especially at the end of each regulation, stipulate some of the fees, some of the penalties and offenses. So the consequences of not applying to the regulation are also stated and broken down at the back of each of the regulations as well. So it is important, depending on what field you're in, that you gain a deeper understanding of the regulation. I do recommend that each engineer, not only the safety, health and environment team, your SHE teams or your safety teams, but also each engineer on site to own a copy of the OSH Act and the different regulations. So I'll show you a copy of mine. So as you can see, it is a working document. So I do have a bit of an older version. I've got the new version as well. So this edition is actually the 11th one. The latest one is the 15th edition. But yeah, just wanting to show you guys that it's important to have and also to use it as a working document. It's not something to sit there, read once and then put it away, but really for you to be able to go back to and refer back. What's important is that you know when there's a requirement or you're needing to check what's what, that you know where to find it. Obviously, similarly, like the Bible, it's very few people that, can quote word for word. It's not about quoting it word for word, but it's about understanding the general requirements and where you need to refer back, you know exactly where to find it. But I will share in one of my later videos how you can actually study the OSH Act, and whatever it is that you're reading or taking in sticks for longer than a couple of hours, but really something that can stay with you for life.